again, or if somebody's not able to make it or something, then you can go back and look at it, particularly for our new folks. So I wanted to, first of all, just start off with a couple of quick notes. This is the kickoff for our 2022 and 2023 grant cycle. We started doing this cycle every 2 years in 2020. And so this is our second time of sort of doing a 2-year cycle. And that has been very beneficial because it really provided more stability for our nonprofit partner organizations that we contract with, definitely reduced the kind of administrative burden on their end and on our end, and coincidentally happened to be incredibly convenient during the pandemic year when we didn't have to run a grant cycle at the same time as having to do a million other things that were way outside of our usual scope. So the downside of doing it every 2 years is that it's a little easy to forget. There's a little more time that's gone by between like exactly what we've done. So our goal for this cycle is actually to try to change as little as possible for our grantees and for those of you who are returning members. There's just too much other stuff going on that people are needing to put their attention to. So we just didn't want to make too many big policy changes or process changes to make it easier for everybody. However, we do have a new application platform, which was not our choice. The company that we had been using, Fluid Review, got bought out by SurveyMonkey. And so they have, changed and adapted the product application portal. We think it's actually in some ways a lot more user-friendly, but it is different and something new to learn. So at the end of I'm going to talk for a little bit here, and then Corey's going to go over very specifically with you kind of instructions for how to get into the portal and how to do the scoring electronically. We've definitely had a big change in focus in our division. This grant cycle used to be sort of the centerpiece of the work that we do. The pandemic has brought a ton of changes, and we've really kind of expanded our focus to not just direct homeless prevention and homeless response services, but a lot more on the eviction prevention side. So a lot of our work and a lot of our grant funding now is going through other distribution means, trying to get COVID-19 relief funding out to nonprofit partners, and really doing a lot of work around eviction prevention. So that's been an interesting change. And then of course, we're trying to do all of this by Zoom and new technology, which is, I think, a year and a half into it, we've gotten pretty good at the Zoom technology, but it does sometimes present some challenges, and it's not quite the same as being able to get together in person. We're keeping a really close eye on, what's going on with case rates and the Delta variant, and our highest priority is safety for everybody. So, we'll make a final determination about interviews, but my strong guess is that we'll be doing them by Zoom, just to make sure we're not accidentally spreading COVID by having people come into the office and do presentations in person. And talking to my colleagues who are on the federal CDBG side, they have done it very successfully last year. And then before we do a round of introductions, I just wanted to make one other quick comment, which is personal. I am having to take some emergency family leave to take care of my mom, who's in her final days. And so I'm not really very available or in the office for the foreseeable future. Corey and I are working out kind of how to make sure that this grant cycle continues, doesn't get held up by my absence, but we are punting a little bit and having to change a few things here and there just because I wasn't around for the last week and unlikely to be around next week. But just wanted to let you know that that's why if you don't hear back from me or if I'm not very responsive, I'm essentially not working, except I came in to do this training for you all because I didn't want to slow up the whole grant cycle process that we've put in motion. So anyway, Corey's super capable and able to handle questions or make sure that I get back to you if there's things that are absolutely essential. And we have done this many times. So rest assured that you're in good hands, even if I'm not particularly available. With that, let's start with a round of introductions, and then we'll dive into the PowerPoint presentation. I think many of you know me. I've communicated with all of you by email, but my name is Kirsten Jewell, and I manage the Housing and Homelessness Division for Kitsap County Department of Human Services. Corey?
Hi, I'm Corey Durenberger. I'm with the Kitsap County Housing and Homelessness Division. I'm the division specialist, or my focus is essentially on kind of data and reporting.
And he's also an amazing, sort of technical expert. So if you have any issues with the application portal, Corey will be your go-to person. How about Jim?
Okay, I'm Jim Cash. I'm actually a member of the county's Human Rights Council, as well as a member of the city's ethics board, City of Bainbridge Island, I should say. I've been on this particular grant review committee for a couple of times. I think this is my third round, something like that. And I'm really, especially given the situation now, I'm really pleased to be allowed to be on it again.
Thanks, Jim. And could you just remind everybody what jurisdiction you were appointed by?
Oh, I'm the at-large member.
Got it. Great. Thank you. How about Roz?
My name is Roz Owen. I am retired from Medina Foundation. I've been on this committee 12 years, something like that. And it's a pleasure to be back. Nice to see you, Jim. Is Tim here today?
Maybe on the phone. Thanks, Roz. Let's see. How about Suzanne?
Hi, I'm Suzanne Griffith. I live in the city of Bremerton, and I represent the city of Bremerton on this group. And it's my fourth year, I think. My gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. It's wonderful to have some folks. It really works well to have a little bit of folks who are returning and then some new folks. There's a lot. It's really helpful to have that continuity.
Well, we still have plenty to do. So.
And it's plenty to do. And then we've got some new folks as well. Or is that Tim? Is that you on the phone? Got somebody calling in. Not sure who's calling in. Let's introduce Elaine.
Oh, so I'm Elaine Valencia, and I'm retired from the city of Bremerton, where I worked for 44 years, mostly in the mayor's office for 7 different mayors. And I was appointed by Commissioner Ed Wolf, I believe, to represent the Central Kitsap area. And last year I was on the other CDBG committee.
Right.
What was that?
The service, CDBG services, I think.
Services, right.
Yeah. Yep. Kim.
Morning, everybody. Kim Hendrickson. I'm the Director of Housing, Health, and Human Services for the City of Poulsbo, appointed by Mayor Erickson. Really happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, Kim. And Sherry. Sherry, you seem to be muted. I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. I still can't hear you. Sorry. Well, welcome, Sherry. And when you are able to get your audio sorted out, feel free to let us know, and we'll have you introduce yourself. Did you get it to work? No? Okay. All right. And then we have one person on the phone. Could the person on the phone identify themselves, or did one of you call in using your phone? It's a number that ends in 1034. You're going to call in? Sherry's going to call in. Okay. Could somebody tell me who's on? Oh, that phone number went away. Okay. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started with our training. Corey, if you could share your screen and we'll get started. You're welcome to stop and ask questions at any time. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult with this kind of Zoom format to see who's got a question. So you're welcome to just type into the chat that you have a question, or type your question in the chat, or we'll also take questions at the end. So this is the training for the Homeless Services Grant Recommendation Committee. As somebody alluded to, the way we've been running these application grant recommendation committees for the last 2 years is that 1 year the committee will review the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Services grant applications, and then the next year they'll review the homeless housing applications. So it kind of alternates year to year. In the original days, we used to have people do both every year, and that, boy, oh boy, that was really a lot of complexity and a lot of work. So we're really happy to keep doing it this way. It seems to work really well. Next slide, Corey.
Oh, there we go.
I think we already did that. On to the next one. So for this training, we're going to talk about just very quickly the funding streams. I always think it's helpful to give some context for community need and a little bit about why we're doing this. We'll talk about that 2022 application cycle, some timing, and then get really into your part of this process, which is the review of the applications and the scoring. And then Corey's going to talk about the technical details of how to get into SurveyMonkey Apply and review applications. And then we're going to wrap up with sort of the end part of the process, which is where we do interviews and make funding recommendations for the commissioners. Next slide. So here you can see the timeline. I believe I sent out the schedule to all of you. You can also find it posted on our our coordinated grant application website, where you can also find the policy plan, the notice of funding availability, and this grant cycle timeline. We will be sending out a follow-up email, and I'll make sure to include that link to the web page where you can find all this information. But in a nutshell, we had applications due last week on the 12th, and here we are today on the 19th doing the training. Starting in a week, we will assign applications to you electronically, and you will be able to go in and score them. We believe we'll have that done by next Thursday. We have to essentially go in and make sure that they are all complete and that there aren't any ones that need to be disqualified for any reason. So you'll be receiving next Thursday an email from us with sort of information about here, ready, set, go. Here's what you need to get going on that scoring. We may do interview questions to agencies in advance. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But then please reserve on your calendars September 28th and 29th, the whole day. We will be doing committee interviews. I don't know yet how many interviews we'll be doing or how long it will take, whether it will be just able to be done in 1 day or 1.5 days or 2 days. We'll have a little bit more information about that shortly. And then also please block off on your calendar the September 30th for the morning, 9 a.m. to noon, to do our deliberations. Probably won't take that long, but it is good to leave ourselves plenty of time. And then funding recommendations will get released on the 7th of October, and there's a public comment period. And then the Board of Commissioners will take this up at their regular public meeting and do a public hearing on the recommendations on October 25th. Next slide. Go ahead, Corey. So this is just some background information for you. Once upon a time, we used to have the applications when people would apply for specific funding of the 2 different funding streams. And that meant that a lot of times folks would need to submit 2 different applications that looked exactly the same. And so 2 years ago, we did a pretty major kind of change. And now applicants just submit a single application, and they can include a request for funding that could be funded through both of the funding sources. So one of the funding sources is specifically for operations and maintenance of shelter programs or housing programs. The other one is more for homeless services, not related to operations and maintenance. And so a lot of times an application would be needing funding from both types of those grant funding sources. But we just let people submit a single application. And then when you get to the point of making recommendations for how much funding an agency receives, staff goes in and helps sort out what is eligible to be funded out of these different funding sources, and then brings that back to you as part of your final recommendations. So we have these 2 different funding sources, the Affordable Housing Grant Program and the Homeless Housing Grant Program. Both of these are funded through Washington state legislation. They are funded by document recording surcharges, which means that every time somebody goes down to the county auditor and records a document that has to do with real estate and a few other things, they pay a surcharge. And that surcharge, some of that money is given back to the state, and the state runs a bunch of homeless grant programs and affordable housing grant programs with that funding. And then some of that funding stays here locally, and we distribute it through this competitive grant program. Next slide. So they each have different eligibility and requirements for them. The Affordable Housing Grant Program was originally designed back in 2003 as a way to make sure that there was operations and maintenance funding available for programs. And so our county has chosen to prioritize this particular funding for new and existing projects that serve people experiencing homelessness and or sheltered homelessness. It has to benefit homeless individuals, and eligibility has to be for activities listed in the 2019 Kitsap Homeless Crisis Response and Housing Plan. So if you haven't gotten a chance to review the plan, that's totally fine. It's a pretty easy read. It provides a lot of good detailed background information about the situation with homelessness in Kitsap County, and kind of lays out our strategies. I have to admit that we had every intention of sort of working our way through the strategies listed in that plan in 2020, and then COVID came along and kind of shifted our focus and preempted a lot of the work that was planned. So I think we'll probably be revisiting that plan probably next year with kind of a new lens of here's where we are in the world today, and here's all the things that have changed. But right now, we're still going to use that 2020-19 plan as kind of the guidelines for what are allowable uses for these funds and what people can request funding for. As I mentioned, the priorities are for projects that serve people experiencing homelessness, and particularly people who are unsheltered or have been experiencing homelessness for a long time. We do have a kind of a restriction that we want to continue spending at least 75% of the funds on ongoing programs, because it's super important to provide that continuity of services. But we are able to spend up to 25% on new projects if there are ones that you all find to be worth investing in. Next slide. As I mentioned, the applications, people can apply for both operations maintenance funding as well as services funding. We do have the same as we did in 2022. We also fund emergency shelters, but in 2020, we moved to a different model for emergency shelters. And that model is essentially a fee for service model. So we pay emergency shelters on a per bed per year rate. So it's not part of this competitive application. They instead submit responses to an RFP. So you're not going to see emergency shelter kind of applications in what you're reviewing, but you will see a wide range of other types of applications for organizations that are serving people experiencing homelessness or struggling with housing stability. These applications, like last time, will be a 1-year award with a 2nd year possible renewal. So it's essentially a 2-year award, but we do a kind of report at the end of the 1st year to make sure that everybody is spending down their funding and meeting their performance metrics and doing a good job with spending the money in the way that they were required to. It's generally not an issue. We were able to easily do renewals for everybody for a 2nd year of funding this year, but it is a way of just kind of making sure that everybody's on track. We also have the challenge of these funds are variable from year to year. So it depends on how many document recordings happen, and that is really dictated by the real estate market. So it's also an opportunity to say, we were able to award you, year 1 funding, but there's a small chance that that award would have to change in year 2 if there was a dramatic change in the document recordings that were collected. Next slide. So because we do try to collect all the funds before we distribute them, unlike CDBG, we are still collecting the funds for this grant cycle and still tallying them up. So all we have at this moment is an estimation of about $825,000 between the 2 grant funding sources. This is a little bit more than last year, or last time. But we will finish doing the reconciliation from the auditor's office, and we will have a final number of grant funds available when we go into the recommendations phase. So you will have sort of a dollar amount and say this is how much there is available, and how does it make sense to best allocate these funds among the applications that you think are the strongest. Next slide. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about community need. I know a lot of you are already very involved in this work, and this is not going to be any new information for you, but for those of you who are not as familiar, this is just a little bit of data. Our division collects a lot of information about homelessness, and we publish a lot of data sheets and updates with statistics. We do geographic kind of wrap-ups and roundups of homelessness data. We do reports on kind of the outcomes from the investments that have been made in prior years, and we collect statistics about people experiencing homelessness. So just as a really high level, we know that about 1 in every 265 people in Kitsap County experienced homelessness in 2020. And in our last point in time count, which is a 24-hour survey done every 4th Thursday in January, we had 199 people that we were able to find who were unsheltered. We did not do a point in time count in 2021 due to COVID. We're still awaiting a determination about whether we'll be doing a point in time count in 2022. So the latest data we have is from January of 2020. As I said, if you want more information, we have a lot available, and you can find it on our webpage, which we will send out to you via email. I referenced earlier our homeless crisis response and housing plan. This is the sort of strategic plan that's developed every few years in partnership and with many different organizations and stakeholders. We have a lot of stakeholdering meetings. We talk with our community and our elected officials and our service providers about kind of what the priorities are. What's the best strategy to reduce homelessness? We look at recent kind of better practices from around the country. Believe it or not, a lot changes every few, from year to year about kind of what the best ideas are, what's working, what's been successful in other communities. And so we're always trying to incorporate that into our thinking about how our community is going to address homelessness. We kind of think about it in some broad categories. We want to make sure that we make homelessness rare, and that kind of encompasses strategies around prevention. So we want to make as few people as possible be pushed into homelessness in the first place. Then we want to make homelessness brief so that for people who do experience homelessness, it is for as short a time as possible, and that they are quickly able to get into shelter and then regain stable housing. And then we want to make homelessness one time, which means that once somebody has experienced homelessness, has regained housing, let's try to make sure that they have the supports they need and the sort of subsidies and strategies in place so that they don't experience homelessness again. We also always are striving to continuously improve the homeless crisis response system by adopting new practices, launching new programs, working with new partners, whatever we can do to continuously improve. And then also, how do we do a better job with community engagement? Homelessness is an issue that most people have a really strong feeling about. And how do we do a good job of making sure that our community has accurate information, a clear understanding of the causes of homelessness, and knows what the county and all of our many community partners are doing to try to address homelessness. We generally kind of subscribe to what's called a collective impact model, where we all have the same vision of where we're trying to get to, which is that we're trying to reduce the impact of homelessness in our community. We're always trying to use national evidence-based practices and studies and research that guides us, as well as data from our own community. And then what's working the best here, and what do we want to do more of, and what do we want to let go of or change.
Kirsten, quick question.
Yeah, for sure.
Do we know what kind of effects the pandemic has had on homelessness? Do we have any numbers that show an increase or a decrease?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was going to talk about that a little bit later. One of the things that I'm happy to do that now, and this is a very important question, but a very complicated one to try to answer, as I'm sure you can imagine. We had a bunch of different sort of countervailing things happening. I mean, I think it's important to understand that homelessness is at its root a socioeconomic problem, not a personal failing. So we have some socioeconomic things happening that cause housing prices to increase, wages to decrease, and therefore people to get squeezed out of the housing market. So I like to think of homelessness as a musical chairs problem. There's just not enough housing units for the number of people who need them, and that causes the prices of that housing to increase. And then there's such a high demand that the people who are the poorest, the most vulnerable, and the least able to advocate for themselves tend to be the ones who get outcompeted for housing. If we had as much housing as anybody wanted, if there were more units than people, we would have a completely different situation. The rate of housing, the prices would go down, landlords would be competing for tenants, even people with lower incomes would have a better chance because prices would be lower, but we're in the opposite situation. That's a very kind of gross understanding of the situation. But essentially, it's a supply and demand problem at its root, and wages have not kept up with the cost of housing. And so the pandemic has had an interesting effect on both the supply and on wages, right? So we've got the eviction moratorium, which has meant that the usual sort of turnover in the housing market hasn't really happened. People are not leaving and moving around between housing units as much as possible. And many, many people who normally would have been displaced have been able to stay in their housing. And that has been true for about 18 months now. So we've got some good things happening in terms of people not losing their housing. We also had, as you all are aware, a huge economic impact of a lot of people losing their jobs, businesses closing or laying people off, or small businesses having to close up for good. That had an impact on people's wages. We also have had, COVID-19 response funding for increasing unemployment benefits, paycheck protection programs for small businesses, which has helped some businesses in some ways. So it's a very complicated economic picture, and we're about to see another big evolution in our COVID-19 kind of impacts on homelessness, in that we're likely to have a big wave of evictions, whether they're legal evictions or kind of self sort of people leaving housing because they can't pay the rent. And so we believe that we're going to see a really big wave of homelessness kind of unfolding over the next, I would say starting in September and probably, for months and months after that. And so that will be interesting to try to quantify exactly what that impact has been. But to your question, Kim, directly, we can definitely collect statistics about the number of people experiencing homelessness now, how many people are in shelter, how many people are coming into the homeless housing solution center. But it's like an apples to potatoes comparison over prior years because the economic circumstances are so very different. So right now we've got a situation where we've got many more people stably housed than in the past because the eviction moratorium is kind of artificially able to keep people housed. But we also have an even tighter housing market as more people move to Kitsap County because they can work remotely. Once the eviction moratorium is off, we're going to see rent prices dramatically increase, harder for those poorer, more vulnerable folks to compete then in that market where they're not protected by the eviction moratorium anymore. And we think the result is going to be more homelessness. Long answer. Sorry, did I at least give you a reason why we don't have good numbers?
So there's been no spike over the past year. That's really all I'm asking. We haven't seen like increased demand for like Salvation Army or the rescue mission.
Well, the other thing that's been complicated is that we stood up an additional, roughly, we essentially stood up another, say, 150 shelter beds since COVID started. So we've been sheltering about 150 more people over the last 18 months than we did in our homeless crisis response system before the pandemic. So there's more sheltered people for sure. Unsheltered people, we're anecdotally hearing about more folks in parks and encampments, but we haven't gone out and done a point in time count to gather, actual statistics on that. We've also, I think the other thing that's complicated is that we continue to have people, well, I'm going to talk about the coordinated entry system here in just a minute, so that'll maybe answer a little bit more of your question. Why don't we skip this slides, Corey? So I think it's important to stress that our homeless crisis response system is a response, and homelessness is, as I just went into a long spiel about, is the result of the breakdown of our socioeconomic systems and our social safety net, which is supposed to catch people. So this is a very complex diagram that I came up with about 5 years ago to try to explain kind of what the system, the homeless crisis response system looks like in Kitsap County. But I think it's complicated because our system is made up of a lot of different organizations that are kind of contributing to create a system. But the really big takeaway here is that we're like the firefighters. The homeless crisis response system is trying to respond to the crisis of homelessness, but is not technically causing homelessness or able to always prevent homelessness, because those are homelessness is caused by these really big socioeconomic forces. We're doing a lot more homeless prevention right now in a very sort of simplistic way by helping people pay their rent. But that is very temporary at this point because those are all COVID response dollars and those are going to go away, and aren't a permanent subsidy. So we're a response system, just like the firefighters rushing to the scene of a fire to put out the fire. The homeless crisis response system tries to jump in and help people who are experiencing homelessness or housing instability to try to help them overcome that crisis and get back into stable housing. Next slide. Yeah. We have a whole wonderful coalition of organizations that are working on homelessness. They are kind of the backbone of the homeless crisis response system. They're called the Kitsap Housing and Homelessness Coalition. It's made up of representatives of all of the shelters, as well as the sort of transitional housing programs and other organizations that also support people who are likely to experience housing instability. So Peninsula Community Health, the food banks, United Way, and on and on and on. It's a really wonderful coalition of folks, and they definitely are our go-to organization to ask for when information and consult with, as key stakeholders in developing our strategic plans. They also are responsible for a huge amount of work around our point in time count and hosting annual service fairs that provide resources for people who are housing insecure. And increasingly, they've been doing work around promoting information about homelessness to our larger community. And before COVID, we're doing a lot of work around Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week and trying to use that as an opportunity to share information in our larger community. Next slide. Really, the centerpiece of our homeless crisis response system is our coordinated entry program. And coordinated entry is a concept that's used across the country, and every county in Washington state has what's called a coordinated entry program. The idea is to make it as easy as possible and efficient as possible for people who are experiencing homelessness or housing instability to have a resource, one place that they can go and get access to information and referrals to access the services that they need. Before we implemented the Housing Solutions Center, households in crisis literally had to go door to door to all the different organizations and try to get on waiting lists and figure out for themselves what they were eligible for. And it was just a tremendously inefficient system. And it was very, very not trauma informed, right? It was so difficult for those households to access the resources that they need. And they weren't always getting accurately connected with the right resources. And so we were a leader in the state in implementing a coordinated entry program. The county contracts with Kitsap Community Resources to be our coordinated entry program. So everybody experiencing homelessness or housing instability is directed to the Housing Solutions Center. They do intakes, assessments of needs, score people for vulnerability, prioritize people's needs, and then make all the referrals to shelters and services across the county. They also, in the past, have worked with landlord outreach, recruitment, and engagement. And in addition to housing referrals, they also can make referrals to mental health, chemical dependency, domestic violence, self-help programs, and a wide variety of other programs to make sure that people are really aware of the full range of services that they can access, as well as benefits that they might be able to apply for. They have offices in Bremerton, Bainbridge, Paulsbo, Port Orchard, and the Coffee Oasis serves youth and young adults who are needing coordinated entry services. So it's important to think of that as sort of the centerpiece of, or the first step in people's journey out of homelessness and back to housing stability. Next slide. So again, I love graphics. I sit around and think about these all the time, how to explain this to people and how to share information with the public about what we're doing. So this is sort of a graphic of how people move through our homeless crisis response system. So you can see in the upper left corner, people have a housing crisis. They go to the coordinated entry program. Whenever possible, our goal is to divert people or prevent people from homelessness. Diversion has to do with non-housing related assistance. So maybe somebody, needs a pair of boots so that they can get a job, or has a legal issue that needs help with resolution so that they can, not lose their housing. Whatever it is, we try to divert people from homelessness whenever possible, or prevent homelessness if that's possible. If that's not possible, then people are referred to immediate temporary housing, which looks like shelter or transitional housing. And while then in immediate temporary housing, a more comprehensive assessment of their barriers to stable housing is undertaken. Everybody is different, but I think of it's sort of in three different buckets of people, three different groups of folks. You have people who have really high needs and need a lot of support to stay in housing. They need both an ongoing permanent subsidy and on-site supportive services, particularly for people with really high mental health needs or substance use challenges or physical health issues. And so we call that type of housing permanent supportive housing. We also have a group of folks who are sort of able to, we can see a trajectory for them to become more financially independent and be able to afford housing in the future. So they really need a temporary graduated rental subsidy that starts out high and then decreases as their income increases, and they need help with kind of finding housing and maintaining that housing during that time. That we call rapid rehousing. We try to pay first month, last month damage deposits and get people into housing and support them to become more financially secure. And then ultimately, the goal is to move to financial independence. And then we have a group of folks, mostly people who are older or permanently disabled, who we really don't anticipate them being able to increase their income. You know, most of them are on a fixed income. A lot of times it's Social Security or disability. And we, what they really need is a permanent rental subsidy or housing that they can afford with their meager income. So they're not going to be able to get a job and get job training and get their income to increase. We have to find a way to have housing available for them that is going to meet them where they are in terms of their income. So this is sort of what our overall homeless crisis response system underlying sort of philosophy looks like. The problem is that there's never enough of the resources in any of these categories, any of those pink boxes. There's never enough shelter. There's never enough permanent supported housing or rapid rehousing or affordable housing dollars. So in a perfect system, this would be moved very smoothly and everybody would quickly move through it. But that is not how it actually works. There tends to be bottlenecks and a shortage of resources. And so that puts us in a situation of having to prioritize who gets access to the limited resources. Next slide. Just for context, the Housing Solutions Center, our coordinated entry program in 2020 referred about 1,747 households or almost 2,500 individuals to shelter, housing, and resources. This is actually a smaller number than they referred the prior year, but part of the reason is twofold. One, we had to really change the way that services were delivered. It used to be people could just show up for an appointment and walk in. With COVID, everything really got shut down and it became much more difficult to access resources, and they had to convert to a phone screening system, and so that was very challenging to make that pivot to delivering in-person services remotely. And then the other reason why I think that number was slightly lower is, as I mentioned, the eviction moratorium sort of was able to help more people stay housed who ordinarily would have been being displaced and then needing to go to the Housing Solutions Center. Even so, 2,500 people last year is quite a significant number. And of those, about 375 were unsheltered, meaning they were living outside in abandoned buildings and places not meant for human habitation. About 1,000 of them were considered to be literally homeless, which means that they are staying in some kind of a temporary sheltered program situation or staying with family and friends in an unstable situation. And then another 726 were imminently losing their housing. Often those folks are people who are staying with family and friends, but the situation is deteriorating and they are likely to lose their housing really quickly. And as Kim mentioned, obviously COVID has had a huge impact on the way people receive services. Shelters are keeping people for much longer periods of time. There's a lot fewer housing opportunities for people to move from shelter into housing because, again, the eviction moratorium is really keeping everybody stably housed. And so, it's just an odd time. We've had an incredible social and societal disruption that's had economic, socioeconomic, housing market, unemployment and income, all, just a myriad of impacts that we don't totally understand at this time. And we probably won't understand for a long time to come until we have the luxury of hindsight to go back and do some analysis about what really happened. The goal is always to provide the most cost-effective solution for households. So I like to show this slide, to members in our community. The data is a little old here, so forgive us. But essentially, at the time that we compiled this information, it was costing about $100 a day for people to be in jail, whereas transitional housing costs about $44 a day. Emergency shelter is about $30 a day per person. And it sort of goes down when you provide rapid rehousing and people can stay stably housed. And then keeping people in hospitals is the most expensive solution of all, right? It's about $2,700 a day for people to be sort of housed in hospitals when really what they need is stable housing and supportive services. Next slide. So that was a lot of information. Again, don't feel like you have to really absorb all of that at once. We're here to provide more information along the way. We've got lots of data and statistics. You're welcome to follow up with me or Corey, and we can direct you to more information if you want to dive a little deeper into any parts of what I've said. I'm going to turn our attention now. So that was meant to be just sort of like a quick introduction to homelessness in Kitsap County in a nutshell. As I said, you can definitely look at the Homeless Crisis Response and Housing Plan if you want more details. There's statistics in there about how many beds we have and different types of housing units and how much other funding is paying for things and all of that. So it's a big picture. Our job as the Grant Recommendation Committee is to review applications from organizations that have a spot in that homeless crisis response system and have proposals for how they're going to help. I would say 90% of the applications that we get from year to year are from the same applicants, the same programs, the same projects. They're just continuing to do the really good work that they're doing. And then every year we get one or two new applications, a new idea, a new thought about how to do something, a new practice that's come forward as being a promising one to help people experiencing homelessness. And so your job collectively as the Grant Recommendation Committee is to try to advise the commissioners on how to spend this limited resource most effectively to help address homelessness in our community. So you'll get a chance to review the applications that have come in, and the first process is actually done by staff. We essentially do a risk assessment on the applicant, particularly new applicants. The ones that we've contract with all the time, we just make sure that they're still on track with their financials, and they're still in good sort of operational shape. Their board is active and their financials are in good shape. So we do kind of a quick risk assessment. We pay particularly attention to new applicants that we haven't worked with in the past to make sure that they're going to be good stewards of public funds. And it's sort of a pass-fail. So we'll be doing that over the next week. And then the second stage is that those applications go to you all. Corey, do you want to go to the next slide? Oh, I already talked about that. Go to the next one, please. So next slide is project information specifically. So stage one is just the organizational information. Stage two, or the second part of the application, is the one that you should really focus on, and that provides proposals for their project information. And that one is scored by both the Grant Recommendation Committee members, all of you, as well as staff. And that's where, next slide, Corey. It's gonna talk specifically about the project description, what they're proposing to do, what the need in the community is, and who they're planning to serve, and what the outcomes are going to be, and then specifically project financial information. How are they going to fund this project? The vast majority of the time, we just don't have the resources to 100% fund projects, and so people need to come up with, through other grants, donations, foundations, other funding to support their projects, because the county doesn't have enough funding to support 100% of the cost of all of these things. So you'll be reviewing those and doing scoring for them. Next slide. So your responsibility during this scoring process is to really be the voice of the community. We don't think of the community in this context as, the city or county that or part of the county that you were appointed by, but your community in the broader sense of all of Kitsap County. Homelessness doesn't know any geographic boundaries. And so collectively, you are representing your community and trying to consider what the need of the community is. We ask you to kind of think about the value of the project based on, compared to the investment required. So are we getting a good value for what this project costs? we ask you to look at how well can the agency carry out the project that they're doing. Either have they been carrying it out well in the past, or if they're a new organization, what's their likelihood to be able to actually do the work of this project going forward. How ready are they to do the work? And we ask that you review applications very carefully and methodically, that we interview applicants, and then formulate a list of funding recommendations for approval. Next slide, please. So for the application review process, both the GRC, you all and I will score the applications. They'll be recorded anonymously to a scoring summary spreadsheet. And then the interview is also scored, but only by the grant recommendation committee. And then those scores are used to help guide the conversation about which application should be funded at what levels. Each year, the grant recommendation committee really has a conversation about how they want to use those scores. Sometimes they're helpful in just remembering how well the program or project is likely to work. I think scoring is a double-edged sword. For many, many years, we did not score applications. We ended up moving to a scoring model when we had more applications than a single grant recommendation committee member could review. And so we had to divide the applications up, and not every grant recommendation committee member would review every application. And so scoring was a way to kind of share information with other grant recommendation committee members about the quality of the application and kind of the program that was being described. The last time we did this, we didn't have so many applications. Basically, all grant recommendation committee members were able to score all applications, and so that's a much better way, because then you can really you can all compare, everything that comes in. I'm hoping that will be true this year, because it just works a little bit better. The double-edged sword about scoring is that it's helpful, but it also, we never want it to be a contest of who can best fill out an application. We want to really try to get down to how much is this project needed in the community? How well is the organization going to be able to carry out? Whether it's going to have good outcomes, and it's going to be able to achieve and solve the problem they're trying to solve, and whether the agency has the funding to do that. So it's easy to kind of get sucked into that, like, oh, well, they didn't do a very good job on this part of the application, and so we're scoring it down. But what we really want you to think about is the impact on the community, and how important is this program in addressing homelessness overall. And so again, I just caution about thinking carefully about how you score. It's a tricky thing to do, and that's why it's really helpful to have a lot of people doing the scoring, because then we can average the scores, and so it kind of helps provide a sort of a more well-rounded opinion about the quality of the program and the application. And we'll have a lot more conversation about how this grant recommendation committee wants to use scores to help guide them in developing recommendations when we get to that point later on. But I just ask you to be thoughtful about scoring, and it does have some complexity to it. All right, next slide, Corey, please. So we anticipate that next Thursday, you will each receive an application of kind of an email with information about the applications that you'll be reviewing. I have to go through, as I said, and make sure all the applications are complete, and that we have a final determination of which ones are moving to stage 2. We are giving you about a month to review all of the applications. You can do it on your own time. You can do. Some people like to do, a few a week. Some people like to, just get it all done in a couple of days. However works best for you and your schedule. And once we have all those scores submitted through SurveyMonkey Apply, we'll compile them into an Excel workbook, which we will then use as we have our deliberations after the interviews. Next slide. So we'll be sending you the application evaluation criteria, which was included at the end of the notice of funding availability, so all the applicants know what they're being scored on. And then we ask that you read the entire application sort of side by side. Oh, could you excuse me for just a minute? Sorry. All right, so we ask you to review each application side by side with the application evaluation criteria. Jot down any notes or questions about the application or that aspect of the scoring criteria that you have. One of the challenges is always really being consistent with applications, because when you're reading your first couple, you're kind of getting your legs under you. You're kind of getting a sense of what these are going to be like. Maybe you're scoring easier at the beginning, or maybe you're scoring harder at the beginning. So we're asking that you try to be as consistent as possible. My strategy is to usually do a quick read of all the applications and jot down questions, but not then go back after I've read all of them and actually score them, so that I have a sense of like what the whole group looks like, and then which are the ones that did really are standouts versus the ones that didn't do as good of a job, or aren't going to have as big of an impact in the community. Be critical and thorough. Each person's going to come to their own sort of like way of scoring. But it's important that you make some notes if you score applications down, because we'll have lots of conversation about kind of why you think that project is, a better project than other projects, why it's going to have more community impact or less community impact. So once you've read 15 or 20 applications, it's easy to forget why did I score this one a little lower than that one? Good to have some notes that you jot down for yourself and you bring to our interviews and deliberation meetings. As I said, I like to, even after I'm done scoring, I tend to go through a third time and say, did I do that fairly? If I scored this one down for this reason, did I score this other one down for the same reason? Like just trying to be as fair as we can. You don't have to record your notes in the SurveyMonkey Apply program. Those are for you and your knowledge. And when we produce any written documentation, it's all anonymous. So your scores will be anonymous and sort of averaged and grouped into an aggregate score. Next slide. We used to have a really, really complicated scoring system. I got to tell you, it got more and more convoluted and complicated every year. And then again in 2020, when we did kind of a whole reevaluation of our application process, we decided to try to just make it pretty simple and boil it down to 30 points for the application. And so we're asking you to really score on sort of 3 primary areas. And this will all be in the application evaluation criteria. So it'll be further explained there, but essentially how sound is the project? Like how much impact it, so how sound is the project designed? How well is it going to meet the community need and be able to accomplish the goals of addressing homelessness? The second category is, what is the community need and the population served? So is this project actually addressing a problem in the community or serving a particular population that's in need? How well does it specifically fit a gap in the community? And then third, the project's financial capacity, and how well is it going to actually have the funding to carry out the work? We typically, at the county level, we have some of the financials for the project reviewed by our county financial staff. So they take a look, they're professionals, right? And professional financial folks. So they take a look at it and let us know if they have any concerns or whether there's any issues that they foresee around, the organization being able to carry out the project. Suzanne.
Yeah, does project financial capacity include administrative ability, like human resources management? And okay.
Yeah. I mean, how well are they going to be able to carry out the project financially, especially given that we probably won't be able to fully fund them. So yeah. Okay. And I know that a lot of this is subjective, and and again, I think that's why it's nice to have so many people reviewing it, because
Yeah.
it kind of helps, it kind of helps smooth out the subjectivity a little bit by having average scores rather than individual scores. Not just one person's making a decision about how well the application is prepared, but a lot of people are looking at that. So you'll be scoring each of these categories on a 0 to 10 scale. And you'll get to enter those scores into SurveyMonkey Apply. We do, again, request that you make some notes when you score something down. Sometimes people like to start with, like, every application starts with a 5, and then they get more points if they do, above average. They get less points if they do below average. Sometimes people like to start assuming everybody gets a 10 and then sort of deduct points based on kind of flaws that they see in the program design or the financial capacity. There's lots of different ways to do it. We just ask that you be consistent between applications. Don't change your methodology for scoring partway through. Next slide, Corey. And before Corey walks you through SurveyMonkey Apply, are there any questions so far? I know this has been a lot of information and a lot to absorb quickly. Are there any questions so far? All right, not seeing any hands. Corey, why don't you get started then? I'll take a little rest from my voice.
Sorry, I guess it helps if I unmute. As we had mentioned earlier, we do have a new platform. In the past, we used what was called Fluid Review, which has been bought out by SurveyMonkey, and so they now have this new product called SurveyMonkey Apply. It is pretty simple to use. I'm just going to show you what you as a reviewer will see both on the website and any kind of notifications that you'll receive as part of this process. So once an application has been assigned, so staff have gone through and evaluated, make sure that project meets the eligibility criteria. Once we go through and assign that to the committee, you'll receive an email for each application that has been assigned to you. So if you currently have an account, you should automatically receive an email. If you don't have an account, I'll be working to set up accounts for you on this system. So once that is prepared, you'll receive an email in your email box telling you that this is, you have an application to review. And then you'll be able to use that link or the link that we'll provide to go to our coordinated grant application website. This is kind of the home page here. You'll go to log in and you'll use your email and a password that is set up for your account to log in. And there's a fairly simple review dashboard. So any applications that are assigned to you, there'll be a section for those applications. So here I have an example of the Homeless Housing and Services 2022 applications. And then you'll see there's the number of applications that are assigned to you. So this is this one. And then there's the 0 here, which is the number that you've completed. So for the homeless services applications, you'll just log in. It will take you directly to this page. And then when you're ready to begin reading and reviewing your applications, you just click the start button to go through and see the list of applications that have been assigned to you. So I just have a test application here, you can see. There's the ID number, the organization that is assigned to, and there'll be a start button here. So when you're ready to review an application, you'll just be able to go here and click start. And I'll walk through the website so that you can see this in live as well. And then you'll be shown a screen like this. There's a lot going on here, but this is a 2-panel screen. So on this left-hand side of the screen, we have the application that was submitted. So the applicant that went through, they completed their application with all their information about their programs. They've submitted it over here. And on the right-hand side of the screen is the application evaluation criteria, or that AEC. So these are all the questions that you will be evaluating. Oh, I think I've lost connection. There we go. So this will be all of the questions and the directions on scoring these applications will be included on this right-hand panel. This bar here in the middle, you can slide back and forth so that you can make one side larger or smaller, so that you can look at the application all on one screen. And you can slide it over again so that you can read all of your instructions. That just makes it a little easier for you to balance the screen the way that works best for you. So when you open up this panel, there'll be a summary tab, which will just show who the applicant was and when it was submitted. You want to click this application button here to see the application that was submitted by the grantee. Documents that they may have attached as part of their application, there will be links to download those documents. So oftentimes there's a performance worksheet, which will be a Word doc that you can download. There will also be some financial worksheets as well about their program budget. On the right hand side here, I'll go to the next slide to show you. So as you can see, I've kind of scrolled down here in the application portion. Towards the end, there's a financial or program financial information section, which corresponds with the financial feasibility question for your evaluation. So as you can see, there's the whole question regarding the criteria that you'll be evaluating, and then you'll put on a score here of 1 to 10, and then include any comments, notes, or questions that you have regarding the score that you provided here for this application. So there will be 3 questions that you'll answer, and then once you've completed answering these questions and scoring, you'll just click mark as complete, and that will complete your review of this application. So let me see if I can pull this over here so that you can see this live. So is this showing? I can't tell from my screen here. It is, okay. So you'll go and you'll log into the website, and you'll enter your email and password. You won't see this screen. This is because I can cover multiple roles on the site, but you will automatically log in as a reviewer. Okay, and here's the review dashboard. I can see the organizational information reviews that are assigned to me, which is that stage 1 of their application, and the homeless housing and services applications that are submitted that have been assigned to me. So I can go over here, I can click start. And you can see I've started working on this application. I've looked at it before, so I can go take a screenshot for this presentation. And here I can continue. So again, on this left-hand side tab here, we go to application, and we can see the application that was submitted by the grantee. And then on the right-hand side, there's our evaluation criteria with all the instructions that go along with it. So you'll put in the agency name, the program name that they're applying as. Then here is our criteria, the project soundness. And as I mentioned, you can slide this back and forth. I guess it's a little resource intensive. Sorry about that. Here we go. So that you can have plenty of room to read all of the responses to the questions that they've answered here. And then you can slide this back over so that you can have some more room to do your scoring and your notes. So I could review this application. Let's say that I give them a score of 7 for project soundness, and then I read over community need, and I decide that I'm going to score this one as 7 and put in any notes as I need to. And then once I am done, I click save as complete. And then it'll ask you to confirm. Oops. Looks like I need a name. And as you can see, there is error checking. So if you miss something, it will ask you to go back and do it. And once you are completed with all of your assignments, you'll get this pop-up that says that you have completed all of your assignments. You can always go back later if you choose to view your evaluations as well. And so that is essentially using the SurveyMonkey website. It's quite streamlined. Essentially just shows you a list of what's been assigned to you, and you go in and you work on your applications from your evaluations from there. It's very straightforward to use. And I am here if you have any questions about how to use a site, or if there's issues getting onto the site or using the site, you can certainly reach out to me, and my information will be provided so that you can reach out to me if you have any questions or issues. Okay. Is there any questions about using the website? All right, I am not seeing any raised hands. I don't see anything in the chat here. So, all right, I think we're ready for our next section.
Thanks, Corey. And, you know, Corey's really able to help you if you have any technical problems or questions, or by the time it gets to next week, you can't remember exactly how to do it. You know, he's available by email or phone to assist, make sure the transition goes smoothly. As we said, we actually like this interface better than Fluid Review, and think it's a lot more straightforward. But it is a change for those of you who did it in the past, and for those of you who may be new to this type of online scoring technology. So just give us a call, or give Corey a call if you have any questions. So after, we want to have all of your scores back to us by September 22nd. That gives us a little bit of time to compile everything over the next couple of days. And then we'll go into agency interviews. So those will, as I mentioned, be on the 28th and 29th. Can you go to the next slide? We've really found that agency interviews are incredibly helpful and important. Oh, sorry, could you hold on? Excuse me just a minute, somebody. I need to. Mom stuff. So the application interview format is essentially a 20-minute interview. And as I said, we think we're going to be doing these via Zoom. Our colleagues in the CDBG division, and those of you who sat on the services committee for CDBG last year, did it that way, and we heard that it worked pretty well. But it'll, you know, we'll all be learning together how this works. The interviews, as I said, are 20 minutes long. We ask agencies to prepare 10 minutes of presentation. They can bring whoever they want. They can bring whatever materials they want. They can put together a video. They can, you know, have clients speak about their experience. They can have financial people, whoever they want, to be able to really tell the story. And then there's 10 minutes available for your questions and answers. Generally, these are questions that have been generated by the group. We'll meet each morning before the interviews start and kind of do a quick review of the applications and kind of solidify some of the questions that are coming up for each applicant. So we'll, you know, maybe talk about the first 4 interview applicants and then say, well, what questions do people have about this one? What were some of the challenges that you saw that you want to make sure the applicant talks about? We'll kind of prepare our questions briefly ahead of time. And then as those applicants come in and do their presentation, then we have some questions that we know are specific to that application. A lot of times there's questions that come up that are sort of want to be asked of all of the applicants as well. And that's totally fine. It sounds like a short period of time, and it's interesting because for some applicants, it seems like it goes by really fast, and other ones, it doesn't even take 20 minutes. So it's definitely something that we've honed in on and found has worked really well. It really gives the GRC an opportunity to add information to your knowledge about what this program or project is trying to do and the impact that it'll have in the community. Next slide. And then after each applicant, after each interview, we schedule a little bit of time for more discussion and conversation, and kind of did they answer your questions? Do you feel like you have a better picture of the whole scope of this project and program? And then you have an opportunity to give them a few more points. You can to add to their score. If you feel like, well, I scored them down in the application review because I didn't really understand this part of things, but I really feel like they did explain it better in the interview. We can add some points to that score. It's not intended to like replace the application, but but supplement and add more information to your knowledge. Next slide. We'll cover this information again, before the interviews themselves, but, we want to just get everybody in the right mindset for interviews. We want to stay focused and on topic. We have to stay professional at all times and not, let it get personal. We have to present ourselves collectively as an objective, discerning, and unified committee, and stay incredibly neutral. Even if you have a project bias or something that you liked or didn't like about the application, we need to remain neutral. It's really important that applicants are given a fair and even playing field to present their information. And then just, try to represent your community as best as you can. And next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about our conflict of interest policy. So we are a small community in Kitsap County, and there is a lot of overlap in terms of the places that people volunteer. And so we have recognized that there is inevitably sometimes some conflicts of interest. And we have a written conflict of interest policy, which we will be sending to you and asking you to sign. In addition to the sort of really straightforward conflict of interest, which typically has to do with directly benefiting from something. So if you are an employee of an organization that is requesting grant funds and your salary depends on getting the grant, probably a conflict of interest, and you shouldn't be allowed to, to score an interview or participate in that. There's also kind of a more legal term called remote interest, which again is very clearly defined in our written policy. It's not a direct benefit, but maybe you have a relative or there's some other way that you indirectly benefit. And then we actually kind of, for this grant recommendation committee process, developed a third category of conflict, which is what we call potential bias by prior association. So sometimes somebody will have served on a board in the past, or isn't currently an employee, but has been employed by the organization in the past, or was a fundraiser for them in the past. All of those things are not that you're directly going to benefit by the organization being funded or not funded, but you may have some perceived or real bias when reviewing the application. And so we ask you to disclose any one of these three types of conflicts. We don't consider having made a donation to an organization a potential bias by prior association, but anything kind of beyond that you've been associated with the organization, please disclose it. And then we have some sort of specific parameters around what you're able to participate in terms of scoring that application or interviewing that agency. And participating in the conversation to make sure that there's not even a single shred of potential conflict of interest here. Our community has to trust that we're making objective decisions and that we're not letting any personal kind of feelings or experiences with organizations affect the outcome. So we take this very seriously. As I said, we'll be sending you the form and ask you to sign it and return it to us. It just simply means that we might not have you score a certain application if there is some kind of a bias that you disclose. It's not like you can't be part of the GRC or that you can't participate in any way, but we just might eliminate you or exclude you from a particular application if you have a potential bias. So, any questions about that? Not seeing any hands raised. Okay, Next slide, please, Corey. So generally on the applicant, on the interview days, we convene generally at 8 a.m. And as I said, we'll have a brief, usually we have about half an hour of discussion and orientation where we review the applicants that are likely to be interviewed or going to be interviewed that morning. We really try to keep to time with interviews. We schedule a break between each interview to make sure that if we run over, it doesn't interfere with the next interview. And we want to leave a little bit of time for the group to talk about any new information that came to light in the interview. There's plenty of time for bathroom breaks or getting something to eat between the breaks. And then we also typically take at least an hour lunch break. So it can be very grueling to do these interviews. And I'm very curious to see how it works to do them on Zoom, whether it's, whether it feels significantly different or not. But when we're sitting in past years, when we've been sitting in that room and having, 7 or 8 interviews in a day, it's been exhausting for a lot of folks. Next slide, please, Corey. So what happens after all of the interviews are done and you turn in your additional scores, the staff will take that information and we'll add it into our spreadsheet. And then we'll convene again on Friday and essentially go through each of the applications, have more discussion, talk about how you want to use the scores, talk about, kind of which ones you want to fund and at what level. By the end of that time, we'll have a list of all of the applications and kind of what your recommendation is for how much to fund them or whether to fund them at all. It's important to go into that conversation knowing that there is likely not enough money to fully fund all the projects. We typically have 2 to 3 times the asks than there is funding available. So there's sometimes really hard choices that need to be made, and good lively conversation is encouraged. And then once you have kind of a total amount that you would recommend to fund each application, then I will go back and look at the different funding sources and which ones match up with what they're requesting funding for, and come back, with a kind of how the funding source is going to break down. So you just come up with the total amount. We think we want to fund this one at $50,000. I'll go back and take a look at what they're asking for and whether there's eligibility, where the eligibility lies between the 2 different funding sources. And then that'll result in a complete package of recommendations that are being made. And we'll put that together with a list of description of all the applications and a package for the Board of County Commissioners. Next slide. Typically, the Grant Recommendation Committee will appoint a representative or 2 to attend the commissioner's work study and public hearing. You can just sort of present the recommendations. The work study is very informal. The public hearing is very formal. We can help you with that, kind of what is expected of you. It's not difficult. I don't have a date yet for the work study, but the public hearing will be on October 25th at 5:30 p.m. And as I said, we can help you with talking points or, whatever information you'd like to communicate. Next slide. And then the commissioners generally have some questions and take public comment through a public hearing process, and then generally approve the recommendations. They rarely deviate from recommendations. Partly because we have a really thorough process and we have really great kind of public participation. And then we go ahead and let the organizations know that they have, what the recommendations are and that they've been approved, or if there's any changes, and then we move into contracting with them for the following year. You can expect to receive from us some emails in the future. So you'll see next week a volunteer time tracking sheet. As county volunteers, we ask you to keep track of all your volunteer time. It doesn't have to be to the minute, but just wanting to record and recognize there's a significant amount of volunteer effort that goes into this type of recommendation committee. We'll be sending you the conflict of interest form for you to sign and return to us. You can, mail it if that works best for you. You can scan it and email it back, or, whatever works best. But we do need that back as soon as possible. In fact, Corey, I think we might need to send the conflict of interest form out right away. And so we can know if anybody isn't going to be scoring a particular application. So maybe I could have you send that out today, and people could, if you guys, committee members could try to get that back to us within a day or two, because that'll determine if anybody isn't scoring an application.
Okay.
We'll also send out the application evaluation criteria and score sheet. That's a paper copy, you know, or I mean, a document that you can print out and use, take notes on it, whatever you want. Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, it regards the conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we know who the applicants are before we determine the conflicts?
Gosh, you were right. Yeah, part of this is my fuzzy brain from what's going on with me personally, and part of it's just having not done this for a year. So thank you. Yes. Yeah, so let me think about that. We haven't compiled the list. So I guess what we'll do is we'll go ahead and send out the application list to everybody next week on Thursday, and then ask you to disclose then if you have any conflicts of interest, and then we'll go in and just fix the, you know, we'll be in communication with you about whether there's any ones that we won't have you score, and then we'll fix that electronically. Does that make sense? Yeah. You're absolutely right. In the past, we've basically distributed, you know, we've had a list of who the applicants are and distribute that conflict of interest form and had you just sign it right away and fill it out and all that. So, but electronically, it makes it a little more complicated. So yeah, we'll send it out to you next week, and then make those adjustments once we have any conflicts of interest identified. So to Jim's point, next week, you'll also get a list of applications, and then you'll be able to start doing the scoring, we think, next Thursday. Later in the month, in mid-September, I'll send out an interview schedule. We have to contact every agency and set up an interview time for them, and that can take a little work. So we'll be putting together an interview schedule, and then we'll send that out to everybody with kind of the final determination of how much time of those 2 days will be needed to do all the interviews, and then some reminders. And of course, Zoom information, and all of that stuff. So you can expect to get at least a couple of emails from us. If we haven't gotten your scores, you know, sort of getting towards September 22nd, you also might get some emails from us reminding you and pleading with you to please get those turned in so that we have those available to compile as we move into the interview phase. Are there any questions, concerns, comments, anything we can? I think our next slide is the question slide, Corey, if I'm right. Oh yeah. So here's our contact information. Obviously you have my email and Corey's email from the emails that we've already sent you. Phone is not a great way to reach us. At this point, we're both working remotely. And then we also just learned that the phone system is down in the Northern Government Center. So people have been trying to call us and there's been no answer. So trying to get that resolved, but best way to reach us for now is via email, and Corey's pretty good about getting back to people pretty quickly. So next slide. So just want to take an opportunity to say thank you so much for your willingness to volunteer. We could not do this without you. It is truly a community effort. We have every year had wonderful groups of community volunteers who are willing to devote their time in this way to ensuring that our community is doing the best possible job to use our limited resources to try to address homelessness. A lot has changed in the sort of picture of services that are being delivered since COVID. And I think it's important to recognize that those are mostly temporary. So some programs are new, but and active right now, but they're only around as long as the federal government or the state is funding them. So our focus has to be on kind of what is the backbone of our homeless crisis response system look like. I wanted to invite any of our returning members, if you have any quick words of advice for our new grant recommendation committee members, I thought that might be something that's helpful to them. Jim, you're smiling. Do you have any, I didn't give you guys any pre-warning that I was going to do this, so don't feel any pressure on the spot, but do you have any, words of advice? I think I don't want people to feel overwhelmed, but anything you would say to our new members this year?
The only thing I can say is that, this is important, but don't let the fact that how important it is get in the way of what you're doing is you're giving of your time, and it's very important that you understand that what you do is important as well, and you have something very valuable to contribute to this process, and give yourself a break. Sometimes it becomes overwhelming, and you need to just kind of step away sometimes and just move away from it. If you feel like you're overwhelmed, just step away and come back. And that's the easiest way that I think you can deal with the situation.
If you have any questions, oops, sorry.
Did you want to add something, Suzanne? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, if you have any questions, just ask Roz. She knows everything.
I don't know about that.
Any words of advice, Roz? Anything you would say to new members?
Well, I second what Jim has to say. It is a process. Go through it. It can look overwhelming, but it really, I don't find it too badly there. I think you've done, each year, Kirsten and Corey and the crew there do their very best to simplify the process and make everything as fair as they can.
Thanks, Roz. Let's see, I'm not seeing Tim on the call, so I think that's all of our returning members. So yeah, again, our huge thanks. We will be in touch by email. If you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out, and know that we're incredibly appreciative to partner with you in this work, and we couldn't do without you. Any last comments or questions before we adjourn for the day?
Hi.
Sherry, yes, you're here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. That's great.
I got a new laptop and I hadn't set my permissions yet, but I just wanted to say how lucky I feel like I am that I'm part of this for Port Orchard. And I just really appreciate everybody, and thank you for having me. I was on the board for Arts for Oakland Kids for 8 years when I lived in Oakland. And every year we got flooded with applications for these art education programs for these kids. And of course, we all wanted to provide funding for all of those kids. And it broke our hearts to have to say no, or to, and then to have to really review the budgets and review all of the applications so precisely because of the funding. And so it is a hard job, but I look forward to participating and to doing my part for the community.
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, well said. I always like to say this job is sort of like the best of times, the worst of times. You get to see, it can be overwhelming because you're sort of presented with all of this like need in the community and how much people are struggling and what a difficult time, so many members of our neighbors and our community members are having. And then you get to see also these amazing nonprofit partners who are stepping up and coming up with solutions and figuring out ways to help people and really, making a difference in people's lives. So it's sort of like this both and. You get the hardship is right there in your face, but then you also get the hope of lots of organizations doing really good work to try to alleviate the hardship for folks. So hope you can find both of those things in your application review.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, with that, I think we'll sign off for the day, and we'll be in touch by email early next week as we get a chance to do a quick review of the applications first, and really look forward to working with all of you. It's been a pleasure. We'll also send out a link to this recording so that you can, if there's anything, if you want to take a time and try to absorb it a little bit more in a different way, there's the opportunity to do that. Or, if you want to go back and take some more notes or something, you're welcome to do that as well. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.